President Milton Obote came to power pledging to uphold multi-party democracy and restore Uganda's shattered economy. Uganda made substantial progress between 1982 and 1985, but its human rights situation worsened. Mr. Obote was unable to control the military. In 1984, reports of atrocities by Mr. Obote's troops increased. The military waged an increasingly violent campaign against the National Resistance Army, led by former Defense Minister Yoweri Museveni. Thousands of civilians were slaughtered by government troops. The United States again spoke out. U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights Elliott Abrams told the U.S. Congress that as many as 200,000 people had been killed by Uganda's undisciplined army. The Obote government reacted angrily, suspending a small-scale joint military training program with the United States.
There are some who oppose you, who accuse you of repression, of murder, of torture. Do you believe that it will ever be possible to unite the people behind you?
In Genesis chapter 1, where God began to make things happen, and things did happen in 7 days, it cannot work in a situation of this kind. Nation building is a long-term process. I'm not a murderer.
Well, we're also talking about an allegation that 200,000 innocent people have been killed. Now that makes Idi Amin look, quite benevolent almost, doesn't it?
Well, no, it doesn't.
If it's true.
It doesn't. I do not want to enter into a game of numbers. I would say that Amin killed a lot of people, far more than 500,000 people. In Uganda, the allegation of Mr. Elliott Abrams was the subject of discussion between the government of Uganda and Mr. Chester Crocker. There was no evidence that was produced except to say that they have got sources. We are as much interested in human rights as anybody else. We came through an electoral process, which means that we have to depend on the electors to be returned power.
When an American Assistant Secretary of State, backed by his ambassador in Kampala, backed by Chester Crocker, another man from the State Department, backed by Vice President Bush himself, says we have reports that provide reliable evidence of large-scale massacres. What I'm saying is that United States intelligence is no slouch in these matters, is it?
Not at all, but it doesn't mean that they are sometimes not wrong. We would not indulge in killings reminiscent of the days of Amin. That's why we fought against Amin. I fought against Idi Amin, and I would not tolerate a situation in which there is a widespread massacres, and our president came to office on the basis that we believe in the fundamental human rights, we believe in maintaining a policy which is humane, but we have a situation in which there are terrorists in the country. They're terrorizing people, they kill people, even those traveling in ambulances. We have to chase them and get hold of them. And occasionally, in the process of doing that, obviously, some people die. But I will not go into any numbers game, and I deny categorically that 200,000 people have been killed in Uganda during the period when we've been in office.
Has there been any disciplinary action against soldiers suspected of violations of human rights?
There has always been disciplinary action taken. There's a number of cases which are heard in our courts where soldiers...
How many?
Several. I mean, I couldn't, give a number, but if you went through our papers, we treat the trial of soldiers just like the trial of any other persons. We do not want to single out any soldiers as if they are outside the Ugandan society, because other Ugandans are equally tried for similar offences. And
there is a widespread belief that the army in Uganda is virtually immune from such action because the government depends wholly on the army to stay in power.
It is not true. The government depends on the people to stay in power. We are going to hold an election this year, and it is for the people to elect us or not to elect us. We were elected in 1980, and that is the basis upon which we are in office. The army, a number of soldiers have always been punished. A number of soldiers have been charged in our courts. A number of soldiers are locked up for indisciplinary action.
But clearly you cannot sit by and see these allegations multiply. Very briefly, because we're coming to the end of the programme, what are you going to do to try to lay it to rest?
First of all, there is a vast improvement in the discipline of our soldiers, because we have instructors who are constantly, giving instruction to our soldiers, and there is a discernible improvement in that. It would need an independent person to give that kind of verdict.
And I'm going to have to stop you there, Mr. Obote, because we're about 30 seconds from the end of our program.
Special announcement. We are glad to announce to you a total military coup in Uganda today, the 27th July, 1985.
Obote had been overthrown, but it was not Museveni's men that carried out the coup. Tito Okello was now in power, and Obote fled to Kenya and then Zambia.
Obote left Uganda in tatters, taking millions in currency from the city's central bank before fleeing the country. A legacy that will be long remembered, for his face will appear on banknotes for years to come. The capital is quiet, but in the heat of victory, after hours of heavy fighting around the military and civilian centres of the capital, ill-disciplined troops ransacked the city. Not a single shop escaped 3 days of looting. Shelves were stripped bare, and businesses run by Obote supporters put to the torch. The evil of an ill-disciplined army has ceased, but in the early days of a new regime, no one's sure of lasting peace. A dusk to dawn curfew empties the streets. Very few dare break it.
For hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, a journey along the dusty roads outside Kampala led to certain death. Villagers, through ignorance or fear, never really questioned why the soldiers came to such a remote place so often. Not until there was a stench of rotting flesh did they start moving closer to the truth. Now that there's more freedom to move, we discovered one place of execution. It led us to scenes of horror, corpses and skeletons scattered in the long grass. They're slowly beginning to unravel the full extent of killings and torture which the old regime had consistently denied. Here are the skeletal remains of at least a dozen people, men and women, whose bodies were left to rot. They say that more than 300 people were executed here. Many of the bodies were taken away for burial by relatives. The bones that remain will never be identified. Opponents of the deposed president, they say, were brought here and murdered, 40 shot a week before the coup.
If they caught you and they suspect that you are one of the guerrillas, no question, when you are brought here, it's just only to be shot.
And who shot them?
The soldiers.
Obote's men?
Yeah.
Amnesty International, who were the first to reveal the scale of murders and tortures under Obote's rule, believed that at the worst periods up to 1,000 people a month were being murdered and dumped in remote places like this.
For 5 years, the old regime denied there were political killings. Uganda will continue digging up the past, which may reveal the last 5 years were more savage than those of Idi Amin. We found remains that still had ropes tied around the bones, tied so that these victims could not escape the executioner's bullet.
As you head north through the Luwero district, the memorials to those who died can be found in virtually every village along the roadside. No one will ever know exactly how many people were killed by Obote's troops. Whole villages were wiped out, and missionaries believe up to 300,000 people were murdered in Luwero alone. These were indeed the killing fields of Uganda.